In 1848, the Great Gold Rush brought hundreds of thousands of people to California, hoping to strike it rich. Among these prospectors was a clever miner named Zach. When not out panning for gold or taking the occasional job as a cowboy, he was known as a bit of a dandy, wearing a fancy fringed vest over a bright red shirt to make him stand out among the rest of the rough and tumble crowd. He was known for using his intelligence and resourcefulness in tricky situations and quickly rose to become the leader of a small group of prospectors. While none of them became immensely wealthy, they did make a good living from gold in California and turned their attention to the territory of Arizona for their next endeavor. Panning for gold as they had in California could only yield so much. The Legold Mining Company was formed in order to sink larger mines deeper into the ground for more gold and silver. In the mountains, Zach and his fellow prospectors found a new fortune in one of their earliest mines, Digger's Gold Mine. One of the miners, a man named Pete, found the largest nugget of gold in the world during these early years, bringing fame to the town and fortune for himself. So many prospectors and miners traveled to the area to seek their own fortunes that a small boom town sprung up near Cactus Valley to support the miners and facilitate gold and silver transport out of the territory. It was called LEGOREDO, presumably after the nearby LEGOREDO River. It quickly became nicknamed Silver City and Gold City Junction, thanks to the valuable minerals being exported by stagecoach, with the railroad quickly following suit. A Pony Express station was established during the early 1860s, and the LEGOREDO Timber Trading Company was established shortly after. By 1872, the town boasted a bank, a general store, a saloon, and a newspaper and printing office for the LEGOREDO News. Among the town's residents were Annie, the saloon keeper, and Dolly Doolittle, whose apple pies were the stuff of legend. Gregory Flatnose Curry, the owner of the general store, and Mr. Goldpenny, the youngest bank manager in Arizona by a wide margin. The prospectors and pioneers who made their way out to LEGOREDO were not the first people in the area, of course. Out at Raindance Ridge, Medicine Springs fed into Snake Creek, which ran through Boulder Cliff Canyon. It was here in Rapid River Village that at least two groups of Native Americans lived, represented by the horse and the buffalo. Another small encampment was a familiar sight near LEGOREDO. The legends of these people, and their succession of wise chiefs, could fill a chronicle of their own. LEGOREDO had the misfortune of being located near the Arizona leg of the Outlaw Trail, a 1,500-mile stretch of backcountry running from Canada all the way down to New Mexico. Robbers and cattle rustlers had left caches of fresh horses and supplies all along the makeshift route to facilitate their nefarious deeds. The gold shipments from LEGOREDO were viewed as easy money by the desperados prowling the trail. In order to protect the small community and the mines, a military outpost, Fort LEGOREDO, was planned and constructed with supplies brought in via the new railroad. Not everyone was in favor of the fort. A time-traveling soccer player was initially successful in halting construction through some superb shooting. This is the earliest of many recorded instances of visitors from other times to LEGOREDO. The attack proved to be only a temporary delay, and after Fort LEGOREDO's completion, the 7th Cavalry was posted here. One of the earliest generals outfitted the fort's headquarters office with sofas and a warm fireplace, and officers visiting the report were impressed at the creature comforts of such a remote outpost. But these homey touches were deceptive, as the clever general had outfitted the fireplace with a secret compartment and installed a pair of trapdoors underneath the sofas. One trapdoor led to the fort's jail cell, while the other allowed for a quick escape outside the fort. Both features proved useful for the succession of generals in the early contentious years of Fort LEGOREDO. One general was said to haunt the old fort, even after his demise. Among the officers assigned to the fort during this time were Colonel Jefferson Armstrong, a proud and blustery officer, and Lieutenant Colt Carson. To keep law and order, the people of LEGOREDO elected a sheriff to enforce the law across the entire county, from Cougar Canyon to Roadrunner Ridge. Sheriff Wyatt West was possibly only the second sheriff in the territory, the first having been elected over in Maricopa County in 1871. Aside from a few eccentricities, such as playing poker with his horse Snow Rose down at Sal's saloon, West was a tough, determined force of justice that the young town badly needed. Sheriff Wyatt West had a distinctive mustache and cut quite a fashionable figure in his fancy gray jacket and bow tie. In contrast to his well-tailored look, he often sported stubble as he always put off shaving when hunting bandits. This sometimes earned him a good-natured ribbing from the well-groomed Colonel Armstrong. Nevertheless, Sheriff West built up a good working relationship with the soldiers of Fort LEGOREDO, becoming friends with Carson and earning the respect of Armstrong. The sheriff would often seek their help in the years to come. But the fort and the sheriff weren't enough of a deterrent for a band of particularly persistent outlaws. One of the best known of these desperados was the bandit Pete Thompson. Under the name Prairie Pete, Thompson was already gaining a reputation as a card shark, bank burglar, and train robber. In short, one of the meanest outlaws in the West. He claimed to be the great-nephew of Captain Roger Redbeard, a notorious pirate from the 18th century. If true, he may have been a direct descendant of Captain Cragg, Redbeard's brother, who was himself a less well-known pirate. Thompson formed the Coyote gang with another notorious outlaw, Black Bart, a gunslinger who had experience handling a newly invented explosive, dynamite. Bart preferred to take on any task involving explosives himself, believing that Thompson often used more than was necessary. This was an argument that Pete disputed only inasmuch as he didn't believe in the concept of too much dynamite. Whichever of them handled the explosives, the results were undeniable. The pair left a trail of blasted banks and jail cells behind them, with the smoldering results attributed to Joe Dynamite, an alias shared by both Thompson and Bart. Bart brought with him a number of irregular Coyote gang members who bore a striking resemblance to himself, possibly his relatives, swelling the gang's ranks and making these small-time outlaws a big problem for Sheriff West. The gang made their debut in dramatic fashion, holding up the LEGOREDO City Bank, hog-tying a bank teller and a cavalry officer, and stealing hundreds of dollars in cash. They were interrupted by two strangers, Curtis J. Elliott and his young charge, Jonathan E. Nolan. Fleeing the scene, the bandits engaged the sheriff in a gunfight and tore out of town in a stolen, armored stagecoach. It would have been a successful heist if Thompson hadn't fallen off the stagecoach during their escape. This was one of the many unlucky arrests that may have led to his eventual nickname, Flatfoot. The sheriff delivered Flatfoot to the Fort LEGOREDO prison, but Bart and another of the Coyotes quickly freed Flatfoot, fleeing once again in the stolen stagecoach, with Sheriff West in hot pursuit. He soon caught up with the robbers, and Nolan and Elliott were made honorary cavalry officers for their part in the adventure. In a bizarre historical footnote, Elliott and Nolan appear to have been visitors from the late 20th century, sent back in time by a mysterious mist. While Nolan returned to the 1990s, Elliott chose to remain in LEGOREDO and may have been responsible for a number of the mysterious technological anachronisms observed in the town over the years. Stranger still, they were not the only time travelers on the scene that day. The sheriff's pursuit of the bandits had been briefly interrupted by a bizarre time-traveling vehicle from the 38th century, whose eccentric pilot asked for directions in German. This Dr. Cyber had already been to LEGOREDO years into the future, though when his relative passed. He seems to have taken this opportunity to hide several code cylinders vital to the operation of his time machines in the desert around LEGOREDO to protect them from his enemies. After escaping prison, the Coyote gang turned their sights on the small and underdefended Diggers Gold Mine. Rather than raid the outgoing gold shipments, the Coyotes decided to target the mine itself. Meanwhile, back at the gold mine, Zach and the other prospectors were loading a large gold shipment into an armored stagecoach. They were planning a holiday in LEGOREDO, but the bandits had other plans. No sooner had the stagecoach been loaded than Flatfoot and Black Bart leapt aboard and took off with the miners' hard-earned gold. Thinking quickly, Zach loaded the mine's cannon with lumps of sugar from his food supplies. While the other miners looked on in disbelief, Zach fired the sweet shot into the path of the horses pulling the armored stagecoach. The horses stopped in their tracks to enjoy the unexpected treat. The noise also attracted the attention of the cavalry at Fort LEGOREDO, who descended upon the stranded outlaws and delivered them to Sheriff West for arrest. The other prospectors cheered Zach, and they were able to enjoy their holiday as planned. Their merriment didn't last long, however, as Digger's gold mine was soon played out. In the final days of operation, a particularly eccentric miner was caught in an explosion, and his body was never found. His parrot was said to still live in the mine, a tale that faded into legend in the following decade. This miner wasn't the only old-timer who made his way into legend. Old Pete had cashed in on his record-breaking gold nugget and bought himself an enormous house near LEGOREDO. He erected a statue commemorating his discovery, but there was something strange about the old prospector. After his death, the building was sealed off, and some say his mortal remains are still there. In the years following, all kinds of supernatural visitors and occurrences were reported near the old mansion. Even with the shuttering of Digger's gold mine, operation of the larger LEGOREDO mine continued for decades, ensuring LEGOREDO's continued prosperity. A decade later, Zach's legacy lived on in LEGOREDO. Many of the miners and cowboys in the town bore a striking resemblance to the old-timer in appearance and dress, and may have been his kin. One such young man was Danny. Danny had earned Sheriff West's trust in countless dangerous situations, and he was soon made a deputy. They were an effective and entertaining pair. While the sheriff trusted his deputy completely, younger men had a habit of getting overexcited, sometimes rushing into danger, only to be rescued thanks to Sheriff West's cooler head. Possibly in a tribute to his mentor, Danny named his horse Duke, one of the sheriff's many nicknames. After spending some time in prison, Black Bart and Flatfoot took the Coyote gang on the road to rob banks in other towns across the West under new aliases, Blackjack and Archibald Revolver Archie Doyle. During this time, another member joined the gang, Dewey Cheatham, a smooth-talking gambler and conman who had seen the gang's early heist in LEGOREDO. Cheatham was known for the sophisticated disguises he employed during his various schemes. It was said that even his own mother wouldn't recognize him when he assumed a different identity. Cheatham appears to have been well-traveled and had some knowledge of exotic animals. His favorite was, naturally, the cheetah. It seems likely that Cheatham was the one who had brought in the strangest member of the gang, the trained monkey who was later named Punky. Punky was small enough to hide in tight places for long periods of time, then emerged to steal things and make a fast getaway. Cheatham was proud at how quickly the monkey could leave the scene of the crime. Punky was such a successful secret weapon for the bandits that he became known as a fourth, small, unidentified member of the gang by law enforcement. The slippery Cheatham quickly became the gang's ringleader. This infuriated Thompson, as he was relegated to the role of accomplice in the gang that he had helped found. But while he was known for always having a figurative or literal ace up his sleeve in tight situations, the clumsy Flatfoot was caught and arrested time and time again. This often left him with little choice but to endure Cheatham's leadership in his absence. And the slimy conman was no pushover either. Cheatham wasn't afraid to end disputes with his ever-present Chesterfield rifle. None of the three bandits trusted one another, but their wildly different approaches to thievery made them a successful team. Their partnership would endure for decades, in spite of multiple arrests and double crosses. After a particularly tough job in Menace Town, Flatfoot's face again appeared in wanted posters all over the country, dead or alive, with a reward of $500. With things heating up for the gang, they returned to LEGOREDO. Flatfoot and Bart hadn't forgotten about the remote, now abandoned, Digger's Gold Mine, and decided to make it their hideout. They even went so far as to obtain, or possibly forge, documents that gave them permission to mine for gold themselves as a cover for their criminal activities. By this time, the mine had been all but forgotten, and even the outlaws needed a map to find the place. They reclaimed the mine's old defensive cannon and added booby traps, as well as the sinister Keep Out sign, topped with a human skull. As the least recognizable member of the gang, Dewey ventured out to run his usual cons. He found the marketplace at Fort LEGOREDO to be a particularly convenient spot. Under the name Joe 5 Aces Williams, he invited new recruits and greenhorns to join him in card games, which he invariably won. During this time, Black Bart and Dewey Cheatham found a pair of mysterious cylinders out in the desert. Not knowing the purpose of these devices, they kept them on their persons as strange souvenirs. In fact, they were code cylinders hidden by Dr. Cyber to keep them out of the hands of time bandits. It wasn't long before time travelers came calling to retrieve the cylinders, though Dewey and Bart remained unaware of the travelers' true motives. The intervening 10 years had been a mostly peaceful time for the town thanks to the absence of the bandits. While the mining town only had 31 official residents, the success of the nearby mines and the arrival of the railroad meant that it expanded to include a hotel, more general stores, another saloon, a hat shop, leather workshop, a post office, a grill house, and the territory's first coin-operated laundromat. It wasn't as large as George Lawtown, the nearest city, but it was quickly becoming an important settlement in the territory. It had even become a place to start a family. Gregory Curry, owner of the original general store, was now married with 2 children, Johnny, an aspiring inventor, and young Lucy, only 4 years old. Curry was by all accounts a good but credulous man who was easily manipulated by the unscrupulous Coyote gang. He often laughed at his son's tinkering. Gregory didn't appreciate that his boy was a genius, and some of Johnny's ideas were years ahead of their time. LEGOREDO's relatively small population meant there was little for the lawmen to do but check the latest wanted posters as they arrived by stage. Among them was one for Flatfoot Thompson, who had returned to the area. West made sure Danny was aware of this dangerous criminal and took an interest in the reward. As it would happen, Dewey Cheatham showed up just minutes later with Flatfoot in tow. The Coyote gang was taking advantage of the fact that, while Flatfoot was a known outlaw, the sheriff and his deputy had never met Dewey before. Presenting himself as Samuel Ethelbert Harvey, or Poker Face Sam, Dewey claimed to be a bounty hunter and managed to get the $500 reward for turning Flatfoot in. This pseudonym was apparently made up on the spot, as Flatfoot scoffed upon hearing it. While he paid out the reward, West didn't trust Dewey for a minute. He arranged to play cards with him the next day to pump him for information, and asked Danny to follow him around town. After seeing Dewey purchase supplies at the general store, the pair followed him outside of town to the old gold mine. At the mine, they discovered Dewey conspiring with Black Bart. They followed the two outlaws down an old mine shaft where they discovered the last miner's old parrot, still flapping around, now gray with all the dirt and soot from the mine. The parrot's chattering gave them away, and Dewey and Bart soon surrounded the lawman. Once Cheatham showed the sheriff his mining permits, he and Danny had no choice but to return to LEGOREDO. The next day, Danny saw Black Bart purchasing dynamite, allegedly for more mining, but West suspected the bandit might try to blow up the jail cell to rescue Flatfoot. The sheriff had Danny follow Bart out to the mine, while he distracted Dewey with their prearranged card game. As the night wore on, Dewey slipped something into the sheriff's drink, knocking him out. The next thing the sheriff knew, Danny and Gregory Curry were standing over him, shaking him awake, and Flatfoot was gone. Sheriff West's own key was in the jail lock. Gregory was ready to believe that West had simply indulged too much the night before, and that Flatfoot had grabbed the keys himself from the sleeping sheriff's pocket. But the sheriff and Danny knew that Dewey must have been behind it. They didn't have much time to think as soon a cavalry officer, Colonel Thompson, arrived along with Dewey. They informed the sheriff that Flatfoot had been seen at Three Finger Rock. The sheriff reluctantly put together a posse to go after Flatfoot, though he still suspected Dewey had some plan afoot. The sheriff and Danny managed to catch up to Flatfoot, and Danny imitated a mountain lion to spook Flatfoot's horse, sending the outlaw flying. Now that he was captured, Flatfoot finally gave in and revealed everything. Flatfoot had allowed Dewey to turn him in for the reward money, fully expecting the so-called bounty hunter to free him later on. Dewey had been behind the sheriff's incapacitation and had used West's keys to free Flatfoot. Finally, Cheatham had suggested that Flatfoot hide at Three Finger Rock. While the posse puzzled over why Dewey had told them where to find Flatfoot, they heard an explosion coming from LEGOREDO and raced back to the town. There they found that the bank vault had been broken into, blown apart by dynamite. After placing Flatfoot back in jail, the posse rode back to the bandits' secret hideout to catch the thieves before they could clear out. They found the old mine shuttered. West threatened to break in, and Cheatham reluctantly let the sheriff and his men inside. The slimy card shark tried every trick he could to deny his part in the bank robbery, but the gig was up once Danny discovered the stolen banknotes. Dewey incriminated himself while attempting to pin the blame on Bart, who had been the one to purchase the dynamite. He took Danny hostage while attempting to escape, finally showing his true colors. Fortunately for Danny, the miner's old parrot distracted Dewey long enough for Carson's soldiers to place him under arrest. No stranger to exotic animals, Dewey was humiliated at having been fooled so easily by the bird. Bart revealed that he and Dewey had intended to double-cross Flatfoot, keeping both the reward money and the banknotes for themselves. This undoubtedly made for an uncomfortable reunion once he was locked up with Flatfoot in the town's cramped jail. Dewey, meanwhile, was taken by Colonel Thompson to the prison at Fort LEGOREDO. Danny wondered why, and West explained that he knew the general in charge. Colonel Jefferson Armstrong had been promoted to general of the 6th Cavalry, which had replaced the 7th, on assignment at the fort, with Lieutenant Carson being promoted to colonel. Armstrong was a notorious card cheat himself, and probably wanted to test himself against the outlaw. The pair almost felt sorry for Dewey, but not for long. All three of the bandits were eventually sent to the prison at George Lawtown. Dewey wasted no time in challenging his guards to a game of poker and stole the prison keys during the game. The next day, he, Black Bart, and a new accomplice, Robber Bill, were gone. The bandits returned to their old hideout at the abandoned gold mine, further fortifying it with an ingenious gun emplacement of their own invention. The mine's remote and easily defended location, combined with a network of tunnels, made it an ideal base of operations even after its discovery. It would be some time before Sheriff West and the soldiers at Fort LEGOREDO realized the Coyote gang had taken up permanent residence there. One of the guards responsible was given 1 week to find the escaped prisoners. He went directly to Sheriff West at LEGOREDO. With the town once again quiet in the wake of the gang's arrest, Sheriff West and Deputy Danny were only too happy to assist. The sheriff decided to go to Fort LEGOREDO to see if General Armstrong would authorize the cavalry to assist them in capturing the fugitives. However, the general was expecting the impending arrival of General Maxwell, a hero who had fought in the Battle of the Potomac. Armstrong was surprised when West and his deputy interrupted his preparations to welcome the general. He was even more surprised when the general himself showed up right after West, at least a day earlier than planned. This General Maxwell claimed that he had been robbed and that his important paperwork had fallen into the hands of the bandits that had robbed him. Because the missing paperwork authorized the general to inspect the schedule of an upcoming gold shipment, West suspected that this so-called general was really Dewey Cheatham in disguise. He and Danny convinced Armstrong to avoid granting Maxwell access to the gold transfer plans, which were hidden in the secret compartment in the headquarters fireplace. That night, he and Danny saw Maxwell sneaking into Armstrong's office. Danny jumped the gun and confronted Maxwell, which led to Maxwell punching Danny in retaliation and accidentally falling through the headquarters trapdoor. Infuriated, General Maxwell ordered the soldiers to lock up Danny. Sheriff West could only wash in frustration as his deputy was taken away. The sheriff spent a near-sleepless night fretting over Danny's imprisonment, wondering how he could save his friend. As it happened, Danny was free before morning as another man claiming to be General Maxwell arrived the next day. He said that his uniform had been stolen by bandits, confirming West's suspicions that the other general was up to no good. And this general mentioned Dewey's two accomplices by name, Robber Bill and Black Bart, indicating that the missing third bandit must have been posing as the general. Armstrong immediately ordered the other General Maxwell to be locked in prison and entrusted the gold transportation schedule to the new arrival. The next night, Wyatt found out that his initial suspicions had been misplaced. As it turned out, the man in the fort's prison was the real General Maxwell, and the new arrival had been Dewey Cheatham in disguise. Dewey's plan had worked perfectly. He now had everything he needed to commandeer the gold shipment with complete authority: the schedule, the authorization forms, and a real general's uniform. West, Armstrong, and Danny teamed up with General Maxwell to intercept the impostor, but they found they were too late. While one of the soldiers had recognized Robber Bill in Cheatham's company, the bandits were still able to dynamite the gold transport and escape with the safe. Fortunately, they knew the bandits' favorite hiding place, only a few miles away. West and Danny led Armstrong, Maxwell, and a detachment of troops to the abandoned mine. Upon arrival, the bandits targeted them with their new gun emplacement, and it seemed that there were few options to force the bandits out of their fortified hideout. Deputy Danny finally came up with a solution to the standoff. He and the sheriff hid inside some empty dynamite barrels and had the others roll them toward the mine's entrance. The bandits were too afraid to shoot the barrels in case they exploded. This allowed West and Danny to get the drop on all three bandits. With Dewey, Bart, and Bill back in jail in George Lawtown, the sheriff and Danny joined Armstrong and Maxwell back at headquarters. The mischievous General Maxwell, seeking to pay Danny back for causing him to fall through the trapdoor, tried to use the escape mechanism against the deputy. He fell victim to his own prank, however, when he turned the table the wrong way and ended up falling through a different trapdoor into the stockade below. The prison in George Lawtown couldn't hold the likes of the Coyote gang for long, however. Soon enough, Dewey and Bart were back on the loose in LEGOREDO. They were joined once again by Flatfoot Thompson, who was determined to regain leadership of the gang after Cheatham had left him to be captured weeks before. Sheriff West rose to the challenge of protecting the town, even as it threatened to slide into lawlessness. The constant shootouts, breakouts, and horse chases hardened West, and he soon gained the reputation as the toughest lawman in the West, with all the tall tales and infamy that went with it. In one story, he walked 100 miles through the desert to lock up Flatfoot Thompson for littering. Another claimed that his shiny sheriff's badge could reflect magic spells. West encouraged his reputation as a tough-as-nails lawman in every aspect of his life, dining on grilled cactus and pouring hot sauce on all his food, including ice cream. He also continued to claim that his jail was escape-proof, all evidence to the contrary. With his identity revealed, Dewey Cheatham abandoned the Samuel Harvey and Joe Williams personas, instead renaming himself Wild John and taking open control of the Coyote gang. Soon his own face was appearing on wanted posters, a fitting fate for the false bounty hunter. The bandits lost no time in going on another crime spree, piling up their loot in their secret hideout. For their next target, Dewey had Bart and Flatfoot hold up the LEGOREDO stagecoach. In a bizarre turn of events, they were interrupted by what appeared to be a strange airborne boat, a flying time vessel, yet another 38th century time machine. This broke up their holdup, but Bart was determined enough to leap aboard the bizarre contraption and challenge its young pilot, Tim Timebuster, the grandson of Dr. Cyber. Tim managed to catch Bart off guard with one of the vessel's laser blades, but when his high-tech weapon jammed, Bart got the upper hand. It was only a fortuitous rock and the arrival of General Armstrong and the 6th Cavalry that saved Tim's life. Sheriff West and Deputy Danny were pleased to see Bart and Flatfoot brought back to the town by the cavalry, and the pair were locked up again in the town jail. Sheriff West was disappointed that his nemesis Dewey remained at large, knowing that much of the gang's ill-gotten goods were still in Cheatham's possession in their secret hideout. With Bart and Flatfoot refusing to talk this time, it seemed that they were out of options to find out where the bandits had set up shop. Tim, however, had the idea of letting Bart's horse go so that the animal would lead them to the hideout. After seeing the direction of Bart's fleeing horse, General Armstrong correctly guessed that Cheatham was still hiding in the old gold mine. A deep ravine separated the gold mine from the cavalry's approach, with a rickety rope bridge the only means of access. As the lightest member of the party, Tim agreed to go first. Unfortunately, Dewey was already waiting in ambush with dynamite. He blew up the bridge, and only the quick draw of General Armstrong saved the cavalry from being blown up themselves. The redirected dynamite and resulting explosion instead threw Tim on top of the con man's head, knocking him out cold. Dewey's loot was confiscated, and he was again taken to Fort LEGOREDO, where the soldiers who had been victims of Dewey's previous schemes were happy to see him marched across the parade ground. Dewey once again had the last laugh, however, as Punky the Monkey emerged from his hiding place among the bandits' loot to cause chaos and destruction throughout Fort LEGOREDO, including demolishing General Armstrong's prized collection of fine china. The general was furious, but it all turned out for the better when Tim agreed to take Punky with him on his travels through time. It wouldn't be the last time Tim and Punky visited LEGOREDO. Around the same time, several other time travelers working for Dr. Cyber popped up again in the small town, seeking artifacts to bring back to the future to prove that time travel was indeed possible. Dewey's humiliating defeat proved to be the beginning of the end of his tenure as the gang's leader. After their latest escape from custody, Flatfoot Thompson wrested control from the wily Cheatham. The Thompson Gang, as they were now becoming known, was soon wanted in 5 counties for robbery and swindling. In one of his last acts of leadership, Dewey led the bandits in another bold holdup of the LEGOREDO Bank. This was the beginning of an epic adventure for Sheriff West as he set out to single-handedly bring the 3 bandits to justice. In the ensuing chase, Flatfoot was, as usual, the first to be captured, leaving Dewey with an open playing field. The sheriff then tracked Bart and Dewey to a Native American encampment. The sheriff captured Bart here, but Dewey escaped to Fort LEGOREDO and managed to tie up every soldier in the fort before Sheriff West arrived. The sheriff subdued Cheatham, and West made the newspaper when he returned the stolen money to the bank personally. The sheriff had managed to put another legendary notch in his lawman's belts. The sheriff's adventure was written out of history, however, when the brilliant inventor Professor Voltage, a time traveler from an earlier era than Dr. Cyber, arrived during the bank's initial heist. The Thompson gang faced off with the professor in a showdown, but Voltage was able to send the entire gang into jail while Snow Rose kicked the door shut. In this timeline, the sheriff barely stirred from his afternoon nap. The Thompson gang was on the loose again before long, apparently attempting new schemes under the names Luke, Ken, and Jack, though the accounts of the period are unclear as to which bandit was which. The gang saw a unique opportunity when a funeral sent their usual fall guy, Gregory Curry, out of town with his wife for 4 days. They had left behind Johnny Curry, the young son, to watch over the store and his small sister. The gang moved in quickly, forcing Johnny to close down the store, leaving the town to suppose the Curry children had gone with their parents. The gang's scheme was to tunnel underground from Curry's establishment to the bank next door, timing their break-in with the arrival of a gold transport to steal even more money. They figured the Curry children would be useful hostages to shield themselves from the sheriff during their escape. What the robbers didn't realize was that LEGOREDO had become the birthplace of a major scientific achievement. Johnny had managed to cobble together a wireless voice transmitter, a device decades ahead of its time. He sent out a call for help, hoping that somebody would hear him. Miraculously, his call was received almost 2,000 years later by Dr. Cyber, who was listening for transmissions from the past with his new invention, the time-transcending reception machine. Taking along Tim, Punky, and Cranky the robot in the flying time vessel, Dr. Cyber traveled through the centuries to triangulate the source of the transmissions and arrived in the middle of the night in Fort LEGOREDO. Cyber and Tim hid the FTV in the immense warehouse-like shed Curry had built next to the general store, where they met Johnny, who quickly told them of his dire situation. The time cruisers visited Sheriff West's office to recruit him into their plan. At this point, Tim and Dr. Cyber were still trying to hide their true identities as time travelers, but they managed to convince the sheriff to go along with their scheme to save Johnny and arrest the bandits. West had Tim and Punky switch places with the gold transport guards, and Cyber stand in for bank manager Goldpenny. As planned, the bandits ambushed them, only to find that the gold safes contained worthless rocks rather than gold coins. Punky delighted in pelting his former Confederates with rocks, while Dr. Cyber zapped them one by one with a zero-time cannon, sending them temporarily into another dimension. The final bandit found his bullets less than effective against Cranky's 38th century armor and surrendered. When Johnny's parents returned, the children were allowed to see the time machine, and the truth behind Dr. Cyber and Tim's mission was revealed. Johnny slipped his primitive radio into the FTV with a thank you note as a gift before the time travelers departed. After witnessing the futuristic technology of the time cruisers, he already had ideas for new inventions. Later, another, more unlikely outlaw brought the time cruisers back to LEGOREDO. Rob N. Hood, the famous Dark Forestman of medieval times. Hood had time-jacked the Hypno Cruiser, another of the Doctor's time machines, and had taken it on an artifact-stealing joyride through the millennia. Trying to hide from Tim, Dr. Cyber, and their friend, the Lego Maniac, Rob fled to 19th century Arizona, only to be spotted by the Maniac in the flying time vessel after Hood held up a passing armored stagecoach. Thanks to the magic of time travel, the Maniac was able to alert Sheriff West and Colonel Carson to Hood's thievery before he could escape back into the dark forest. The Maniac and the time cruisers decided to stay an extra day or so to visit LEGOREDO, as the Maniac hadn't been there before. They believed that Rob N. was safely locked away in the sheriff's jail. What they hadn't considered was LEGOREDO's outlaw grapevine. The Thompson gang was at large once again, and Dewey Cheatham brought the news of a locked-up time bandit back to Flatfoot and Bart. By this time, the gang was no stranger to time travelers, and they could see the advantages of having a chronological crook on their side. They broke Rob out the next morning in the usual explosive manner. Now all 4 time bandits were on the loose in the stolen Hypno Cruiser. The Maniac quickly turned the money wagon into a smaller, faster time machine to pursue the gang, bringing Sheriff West along for the ride. Rob found that his unsavory saviors weren't quite as useful as he had hoped. The 3 bandits managed to overload the Hypno drive by putting on multiple hats at once, not realizing they were an important part of the time machine's navigation. The Maniac rounded up the would-be time bandits and dropped them off at Fort LEGOREDO for holding. But it wouldn't be long until they escaped once again, thanks to a stick of dynamite Flatfoot had smuggled in his boot. The bandits returned to their secret hideout, planning once again to rob the bank. Not realizing the bandits had escaped, Dr. Cyber visited the mines in search of gold to make holiday decorations. He was able to help young Billy the Kid Wagner, another inadvertent time traveler from the late 20th century, escape the bandits and return home. Cyber's holiday preparations were interrupted when the Maniac asked him to help recruit some friends to assist Explorian and Droid in recovering a lost cargo of gifts. By this point, he and Sheriff West were good friends, and the sheriff brought his horse on a festive journey through time and space to retrieve the presents. In the far future, West was able to see a wide variety of technological devices and even got to spacewalk with his horse, lassoing presents in zero-G. Afterwards, Sheriff West introduced Dr. Cyber, Explorian Nova Hunter, and the Aqua Shark Thresher to a Mexican holiday tradition by blindfolding them to break a piñata. After returning to his own time and place, Sheriff West found that a stagecoach carrying a safe full of greenbacks had been burgled by Flatfoot and Bart in Showdown Canyon. The sheriff and one of his deputies tracked the bandits to their new hideout in an old cabin. West caught Bart trying to make an escape and made a dramatic entrance through the cabin window. He pulled Flatfoot out of his hiding place, and after taking the outlaws back to LEGOREDO, he left town for a vacation, putting his deputy in charge. Not long after, Flatfoot made his most surprising escape yet when the time bandit Tony Twister arrived. After stealing a pioneer family's nest egg, preventing them from building a little house on the prairie, Tony pulled Flatfoot from his own time stream. He dropped Flatfoot off in disguise on the planet Roboton, in a far-off galaxy, thousands of years in the future. The bandit lost no time in stealing a valuable robo-disc from the local robo-force, though whether he knew what to do with the power source was another question entirely. He eventually got cold feet over further robotic encounters when the Maniac unintentionally trapped him in a snowball. Sheriff West continued his own travels across time and space in the years that followed as the citizens of LEGOREDO became involved in different competitive events. He journeyed to Chessland to meet the Crazy Chess King, and to Legoland when the town's soccer team, the Western Cowboys, was selected for one of the qualifying rounds in the prestigious Lego Cup. This event saw an exciting match played in the field just outside the city. The town's lawmen organized themselves into their own team, the Lawbringers, and West himself participated in the event, possibly as both Bob and Dal Sheriff. The Thompson gang formed their own team, the Bandits, with Flatfoot playing as Bill Bullet, Dewey Cheatham as Nick Dollars, and Black Bart as Brian Bandito. While Thompson remained the gang's leader, Black Bart soon took the spotlight as the most notorious figure in the gang. Given the gunslinger's dead aim, it was probably inevitable that he would be charged with murder, earning him yet another alias, Killer Sam. Sheriff West and Danny put Bart behind bars, but Flatfoot staged an explosive rescue that night. In the gunfight that followed, Danny was shot in the stomach, and the 2 bandits escaped. Danny survived his injury, but now Sheriff West had a personal stake in pursuing Bart. He chased him for hours on horseback into the mountains. He hit Bart over the head with his pistol, knocking the bandit out. He could have settled the score then and there, but West was determined to offer him a fair fight. The gunslinger and the sheriff squared off to see who was the fastest gun in the West. The sheriff proved quicker on the draw, shooting Bart's pistol out of his hand. The impact caused the gun to explode, injuring the bandit's hand, ensuring that his trigger finger would never be the same again. Bart was brought to trial the next day at dawn, and he was put away for some time, ridding the town of one of the worst bandits in the West. As the decades rolled on, the West became slightly less wild. In 1890, LEGOREDO finally incorporated, gaining the name Legoville, which had already been in use for many years. Sheriff West continued to serve as law enforcement for the growing community, though he still preferred the town's older, more colorful nicknames. On February 14, 1912, Arizona finally became a state, bringing more recognition and representation. This was far from the end of Sheriff West's adventures, however. The Thompson gang was still active, with Black Bart returning after his lengthy incarceration, though the cat-and-mouse game between the older lawmen and the aging bandits had become noticeably less adversarial. In the tumultuous early decades of the 20th century, a new criminal organization began edging into Thompson's territory from South America, led by the notorious outlaw, Senor Palomar. The Palomar gang hijacked the Lego Express train leaving Legoville Station. It was carrying the gigantic Gale's Eye diamond, recently discovered by adventurer Johnny Thunder in Antarctica. It was bound for the Legoland Museum. The gang planned to stop the train at the old mine, where Palomar would hand off the diamond to his mysterious benefactor. Fortunately, it seems that the sheriff's wide-ranging experiences made him an early adopter of the kind of radio technology pioneered by LEGOREDO's own Johnny Curry. Sheriff West had the foresight to have a radio installed in his office. The gang had brought along one of the newfangled devices to contact Palomar's boss. The crew of the Lego Express, including engineer Max, conductor Charlie, and their young friend, were able to use the radio to call the sheriff for help. They managed to stop the train at Big Oak Tree before it reached the old mine. Sheriff West showed up just in time to arrest Palomar and the gang. He rewarded the crew's young friend by making them an honorary deputy. Sometime after the sheriff's arrest of the Palomar gang, he and Colonel Colt Carson went for a ride on the outlaw trail. They were far from home, nearly to Colorado. It was a cold night, and a campfire caught their eye. Hoping for some warmth in the desert night, they rode into the campsite, only to find that it belonged to the Thompson gang. But this far from Legoville, and with no current warrants out for the bandits' arrest, Sheriff West greeted his longtime adversaries and told Flatfoot not to worry. It was just the two of them, and they weren't after him, this time. Dewey Cheatham made the extraordinary claim that they had seen 3 riders come into the camp. Flatfoot suggested that the 3rd rider might have been Butch Cassidy, a famous outlaw. Butch was believed to have died in Bolivia in 1908, but legends claim that he still rode the outlaw trail as a ghost. The 5 men made the most out of their temporary truce, swapping legends and ghost stories of the rapidly vanishing frontier. Dewey recounted a story that he heard about hidden gold in the Black Prince mine in Colorado. Colonel Carson told tales of ghosts haunting Fort Laramie in Wyoming, and of his own encounter with the angry ghost of a general in Fort LEGOREDO. The story that Sheriff West told spoke to his own fears and concerns. He gave the story of the boomtown of Garnett, Montana, which had been abandoned after a fire in 1912. Mysterious voices, laughter, and music had been reported in the ghost town, which was only recently being restored. The sheriff remained confident that his own town would never fall into ruin the same way, reminding Flatfoot of the new, stronger jail that would hold any outlaw should they decide to return and make trouble. But Flatfoot replied that the spectral figure of Butch Cassidy that they had seen earlier had just stolen the sheriff's horse. In a time when civilization and modernity had nearly tamed the formerly Wild West, it seems the outlaw ghosts had the last laugh, after all. While Legoville would live on, historic LEGOREDO did indeed become a ghost town. If you visit the museum there, you'll see photographs of long-gone outlaws, townspeople, and cavalry officers. But don't linger too long, because LEGOREDO is full of legends of gold and ghosts, of outlaws and people outside time. And if you stay too long, you might just wind up reliving some of those legends yourself.